Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Bridges, Sales Director at PFP, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Richard Spencer from Towergate and Martin Joyce from Arch Insurance. So welcome both.
Hello, hi.
Hi, good afternoon.
So just to give a little bit of context on today's webinar, PFP, we are part of the Ardonna Group, as some of you may or may not be aware, UK's largest independent insurance group. We've got some great company with some big names in the world of insurance and bits and pieces of what we're doing. Today we're joined by Richard and Martin. Richard from Towergate, and one of the things that we would just like to introduce Towergate with PFP as a member of our group, and one of the things we're looking at is products and areas and awareness that we can help out our accountants with across the UK. So Richard, just want to give a little bit of background on Towergate for those that...
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, thank you for letting us help you on this webinar, and yeah, hopefully the start of future webinars as well for topics on insurance or risk management that may interest the audience. I think it's suffice to say that Towergate are now one of the largest, or the largest independent insurance intermediary in the UK. The Ardonna Group actually was formed off the back of Towergate rather than the other way around. Slightly ironic, on the previous slide you would have seen people like Swinton you may recognise rather than Towergate. If you have a look at the actual numbers on that slide, you can read them for yourselves, but in terms of size and scale, the thing that's probably most of interest is that we can give a local service, and we have got over 60 offices across the UK. But yeah, great to be introduced on this, and I think cyber is, we certainly seen that cyber risk and cyber insurance is one of the fastest growing areas of insurance risk over the last 12 to 24 months. That's both in terms of numbers of requests for quotation and insurance product development by insurers, just to keep up with the demand and pace of change with this ever-evolving risks. So I think it's a topic that's going to be here to stay.
So what we're introducing today, and it's this webinar has really come off the back of chatting to you guys out there over the last sort of 6 to 12 months, and cybercrime and cyber insurance is something that we've talked to a lot of accountants about and certainly raised a lot of interest. Off the back of the webinar today, we are launching an awareness campaign for our accountants, and this is in conjunction with Towergate, so look out for the bits and pieces that will be coming out. And really from those conversations with our accountants, that's why we started talking to Richard and Towergate and Martin, the guys, asked to see what we could look to do to help out our accountancy practices.
Okay, as independent brokers, we have access to a range of insurance products to cover cyber and crime risks. But today, you know, we'd like to introduce Arch Insurance, as they've kindly offered to take us through some slides, which has shed some more light on the subject. I'd like to hand over to Martin Joyce, who's the head of financial lines in Arch. There will be some questions at the end, but do post questions during the meeting. Is there I?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. One of the quick questions we always get this at the start of every webinar. Yes, the slides and notes will be sent afterwards as long as they're recorded of the webinar as well. So, Martin, nice to see you this afternoon.
Hi guys, I'm assuming you can hear me. Well,
Yeah.
if you can hear me, everyone else can, yeah? Thank you. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right, great. So I'm just going to run through this material, everybody. Thank you for coming, by the way. And as Richard and Chris said, if you've got any questions and you want to intervene, it's no problem, or save them till the end. It's up to you guys. This material is mainly in bullet points, so I'll expand on those as we go through it, but it's all available as Chris said afterwards. So really, just to set the scene a little bit about us as a business, and this, I'll just give 30 seconds on this. We are at Arch, we are a global insurance business, firstly established in the US, and for 20 years in the UK. We are A+ rated security with Standard & Poor's and all the main rating agencies. And we've really taken a step into the UK regions outside of London in the last few months when Arch acquired the old Fusion Arista underwriting business, from which we acquired a real good footprint of UK regional offices, 11 from Glasgow to Southampton. So as a business, A, we're well established in globally, and B, we've acquired a very well established UK business with good distribution. And critically, Arch's legacy and reputation is built on financial lines, mainly PI and D&O. PI you'll all be familiar with, D&O as well. And cyber fits firmly into that box. So it's something that as a business we've graduated to in the US for many years. And quite recently we've launched a brand new cyber product in the US. It is not, and I'll stress it, is not a graduation of a US product. This is a brand new ground up UK product aimed at UK SMEs. And we class that really as up to 50 million turnover businesses. And we can certainly go beyond that, but our attritional underwriting and our quick underwriting model is based on up to 50 million. Chris, if you can crack on with the next one, please. So what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll look at why this insurance is important, what the risk is, some of the key language in not just our policy, but every policy. And the terms that I'll go through are ones that I've picked out, because I think if you can get an understanding of what they mean, it will make the exposure that you and every other business in the UK has, and what a policy will do to respond to that as that moves on in the event of an event being a cyber event, whether that's a breach or a hack or an extortion, ransomware demand, and so on. But we'll get into that, and then the right products and what your premium gets, which is a response service from key service providers. So we'll kind of run through this process over the next half an hour or so. Chris, thank you. Can you do the next slide for me? Thank you. Right, so just to set the scene a little bit, look, cybercrime it's box office, right? It's in the news. It's never out of the news cycle to some degree. You've all probably heard of Carphone Warehouse and TalkTalk, and British Airways have had headline issues, but a report published 4 years ago by the National Crime Agency suggested that 74% of UK SMEs, that's a definition from the DTI, which is up to 250 million turnover, had suffered some kind of breach. Now, many of those businesses don't actually know about it on occasion, because a breach of data or a breach of your network can happen, but until until a criminal or another organization or an individual acts on the value of that breach, you don't know about it. So you could have been breached 2 years ago, and until someone actually uses the data exposed, you don't know about it. If you think about that in personal terms, if I hacked your credit card details today, put it on the dark web, and someone paid for that information in 12 months' time, and then undertook fraudulent transactions on your credit card, you wouldn't know about it until it actually happened in 12 months. So until a breach is actually acted upon, it's unlikely you'll know about it. And we'll talk about claims made as opposed to occurrence later, but that's really the overriding philosophy of this type of insurance. Cyber criminals are global, okay? If you are party to the news cycle, you will no doubt be aware that certain areas of the ex-Russian Federation, China in particular, and other parts of Eastern Europe are hubs for this kind of thing. It's not unique to those areas, but certainly there's a concentration of it there, where these guys are well-funded, well-resourced, highly motivated, and operate this is not a local issue. You don't have to be in England to hack a UK or English business. You can be anywhere in the world. This is a global risk. I don't think there's any doubt that the future of organized crime is going this way. And this is set to replace things like drugs, prostitution, gambling, and such like, which are expensive, require a lot of people, and our local operations. Cyber is, you can go global from a room in Bulgaria, for instance. And this is the fastest growing and most sophisticated exposure that any business, including your businesses, have. So it's certainly something that needs to be given due consideration. There is a statistic there. There is no shortage of statistics, but the average cost of a breach, and we'll get into the definition of that shortly, in the UK is about 116 grand. To a Corporate business over 250 million turnover, it's reckoned to be about 900,000. And when we say the cost of a breach, what we mean is forensically investigating the outcome of that breach of data and notifying the individuals affected and dealing with the regulator. That doesn't include defence costs. That value doesn't include defence costs generated by defending an action by the regulator. And everyone is regulated. There is no get out clause for the ICO. You are, by dint of your existence, signed up to the GDPR regulations. And although they've been around for a little while now, there is a number of ongoing actions. There's a huge BA, it's not a class action, we don't have them in this country, but it's not far off, going on at the moment that will create some kind of precedent, but there is a lack of notable precedent at the moment, and that does create uncertainty. The certainty is you are regulated and the ICO will and do bring actions. They are largely unresolved at the moment, and their powers of, or their overall power is much more amplified than it was under the Data Protection Act. The Data Protection Act had a maximum fine of €500,000. We are now at 20 million euros and or up to 4% of global turnover. So if you are KPMG, 20 million euros is not a big deal, but 4% of X billion is certainly far more impactful. Chris, would you mind? Thank you.
Yeah, just coming in on there, Martin, we know of at least one sizable accountancy firm that's had a fine from the ICO. They had a breach, and some of their personal tax data was shared and sold, or whatever the cyber criminals do, and they had quite a hefty fine from the ICO, and that kind of highlighted with the information that accountancy practices carry. You know, think about all the information that you guys have on your different servers in the cloud and stuff with your clients. It's it certainly would be attractive for any cyber criminal. That's the kind of feedback we've been getting the last sort of 6 months or so.
Thank you. Okay. So, okay, why do you need this cover? Or why do we, well, certainly why do we as underwriters and brokers feel that you need this cover? Every business in the UK has an exposure. I mean, virtually without exception. I can't imagine there's any business, even my brother who runs a small building company is reliant upon his IT email for invoices and payments and for storing contract and client information, up to much more sophisticated global PLCs. And in the middle, in this country, there are hundreds of thousands of SME businesses, all of whom have a heavy reliance on IT infrastructure in their business. And accountants certainly sit, if you think from our position as underwriters, a low exposure business would be probably a small contractor or perhaps a wholesale business. Mid-level certainly is professional services, which is where we would put accountants, architects, solicitors and so on. And very high exposure would be things like retail, where there's a huge amount of personal data held, managed care, medical care and so on, where there is, and gambling, online dating and networks, social network services, where there is, these guys are real targets for cyber criminals and they have a very severe exposure. But certainly accountants sit within that, and I've no doubt that everyone on this call has a very, very heavy reliance on IT to run their business, and that goes from a small sole trader up to the global top 5 businesses. Chris, thank you. Exposure exists at multiple levels, and these phrases here that I've singled out really are where we get into what the policy talks about, discusses, says, and covers. Breach of data. When we talk about data, and certainly within GDPR, we mean personal data. Data that you hold as a business, and any business holds, on private individuals, and that could be anything from a name and address up to medical records, financial records, bank account details, and so on. No matter what it is, you are required to protect that information as best you can, basically. Forensics is, if there is a breach of data, forensics will determine the level of that breach, who has been exposed as a consequence of the breach, how deep does it go, and what is required to bring it back to its previous level. And part of that is notification to data subjects. This is where the ICO come in. So if a business has a data breach, personal data is exposed, Richard mentioned that situation with an accountant earlier on, then you've got 72 hours to tell the regulator, and they are then empowered to ensure that you notify each of those individuals that that data has been breached and provide ongoing services such as credit monitoring services, for instance. And there is a cost to that. There's no doubt about it. The average cost to insurance companies of an SME breach just for notification is about 35 grand at the moment. So that's just to email or telephone these people to tell them that they've been the subject of a breach and offer ongoing services. That doesn't include the forensics that gets you to that point anyway. Business interruption. This isn't just deal with breach. If you have an intrusion into your business, a hack in any policy is defined as any unauthorized intrusion by a third party or employee into your business. If that destabilizes your business, causes a network partial or full breakdown, then your business rather, will lose revenue as a consequence. We have a small, in inverted commas, waiting period, which is 8 hours. After that 8 hours is elapsed and your systems are down, the policy will respond and indemnify your business for the loss of revenue caused by that service downtime. Regulatory investigations, these are brought by the ICO in the event of a breach, so we're back to breach here, and the policy will cost the defence by a law firm of that regulatory investigation. Extortion, this is perhaps the one that fills the news cycle, and if we all think back to a couple of years ago when WannaCry ransomware got into the NHS, I think it got into half, more or less, of the UK NHS local authorities because they hadn't patched their Microsoft XP systems. Microsoft XP is used by 70% of SMEs in the UK, and XP was effectively disowned by Microsoft 4 years ago. So that operating system has not been updated for 4 years. You will regularly get security patches for it, but it's an unadopted system now, and it's vulnerable. There's no doubt about it. Extortion is when you turn on your computer and you have a screen that may well have a skull and crossbones or something equally dramatic on it, and basically you're being told that your entire system has been locked down until you pay a ransom, and that's the extortion part of it. Your data will not be released back to you. These ransoms range wildly, from several £100s through to many, many thousands. They are going up. The average value is increasing, and they're usually paid in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or the like, which is more or less untraceable. There are instances, and there is evidence to suggest this in our claims experience, that when you do get your encryption key back to release your data back to you, not all your data is recovered. If some of it is not backed up or protected properly, you can lose data, and the policy will cost the reconstitution of that data. There was a claim for a high street opticians chain a couple of years ago, which had a £400 ransom, and they recovered 90% of their customer data. The recovery of the remaining 10% was £62,000 just to recover that data through an IT consultancy business. So it's not just the ransom; it's what can happen afterwards, depending on how, depending on the integrity of the security around the data that's been hacked and held by the criminals. And then financial loss. Financial loss is really what we term and what you may know as what we call social engineering, which is a direct first-party financial loss to the insured, to you as the policyholder, in the event that a cyber criminal has hacked your systems and undertakes an electronic impersonation, email generally, of someone within your business or one of your third-party suppliers or customers to basically divert a payment to a criminal's bank account. So very often people talk about fake payments here. That's not really the case anymore. These guys will monitor email, monitor your movements and the language used in these emails, and they will effectively, by impersonating someone in your business, convince you to pay an invoice or a bill, and when you pay it, it will go to the new bank account details you've been supplied with, which is the criminal's bank account, not where it should go. And that is a direct financial loss. Chris, would you mind? Thank you. Again, some more language here, really. Hack, as I said earlier, is any unauthorized intrusion. A data breach, we've talked about, and we'll touch on again shortly. Extortion, financial loss, we just talked about. GDPR regulatory investigations. These are all real everyday threats to business. And we've talked about some of the quantum of cost values to some of these in terms of what the average cost is, but they are damaging. And it's important that you're aware of what the cost can be. And if you do have these events, a breach, for instance, if you don't have an insurance policy, what do you do? Because you have to do something. There's no way around it. And if you have to pick up the phone and start speaking to forensic consultants, to notification response service providers, and to lawyers, you're looking at 4 figures per day in fees, and the policy will cost that for you through, and you get instant access to it. You don't have to find it. We have these people. We will supply them to you. Right, just moving on slightly, I've got 3 or 4 slides here which identify some of the key language in certainly our policy and just about every other policy. So these are really baked into the cover. So it's not every single definition, but these are perhaps, if you can understand what these mean, it will perhaps give some clarity to what the cover does. A data breach is a breach of security, and when security, we just mean any protections that you have on your system, that leads to the accidental, unlawful destruction, loss, or alteration of personal data. Now that is a definition in our policy, and that's what the GDPR regulations say. Forensics is, we've touched on that, that is identification of the cause of a data breach, but it goes further than that. It's also identifying the affected subjects, the individuals whose data you hold who have been affected by that breach. When we talk about a computer system, as I said earlier, we mean any electronic device, including software, owned, operated and controlled. So, you don't have to own it, you can lease it and use it within your business. And that doesn't just mean fixed terminals and PCs, it means smartphones, tablets, laptops, and similar devices. Chris, thank you. Notification services, this is notifying individuals and regulators or others as required by law, and again, this is language from a policy, and voluntary notifications impacted by a data breach. So you'll have a mandate from the ICO, but if you undertake voluntary notifications, and the policy will, if that's required, the service provider will recommend it if it's required to do it quickly, even before the ICO tell you to do it. That may well mitigate your position with the regulator to some degree, because you have to do it anyway. But if you've done it by the time they tell you, then they'll certainly view it a bit more positively. I hope that makes sense. But what it also means is, if you go back to Talk 4 or 5 years ago, they went on the TV. The lady who ran the business, the CEO of that business, went on TV and made it plain that they'd had a massive breach of data. And what that will do will generate a huge amount of incoming call traffic to your business to find out from customers if they've been the victim of that breach. We will provide, should it be required, call center services to deal with that traffic, because you can't do it. You are an accountant, you're not geared up to deal with dozens, hundreds, potentially thousands of concerned individuals contacting you to find out about the extent of a breach. Data recovery costs, this is replacement, restoration and repair of data assets. So the data that you hold and store to prior standards before there is a system failure or a breach. Okay, so it's really, that is perhaps the pure indemnity side of this policy that will bring your systems and data values back to where they were before there was an issue. And when we talk about cyber services, this is a key point. Effectively, when you pay us a premium, we are saying what that gets you is immediate access, and I'll keep hammering this point home, and I make no apologies for it. It's straight access through the notification of that incident to legal services, forensics, notification services, call center services, identity protection services, cyber extortion services, so you'll get a specialist who will deal with you to bring that issue to a conclusion, crisis management and PR. You've got to hand, all these elements are generated by an event, whether it's a breach or a ransomware attack or a malware attack, whatever it may be, or any kind of virus that gets into your system via unauthorized intrusion. It will cost those services for you, and they are very expensive and potentially very damaging to your business. That is what the policy does. Your premium buys you that, and that's perhaps the key point really to take away. Chris, thank you. Okay, so we've gone through some of the key terms. In the event of an event, so when something does happen, what you have here, as you do with your PI, you have a claims made policy. And we talked earlier about the personal side of this. So if you do have someone hacks your credit card details, but no one actually uses it for 12 months, it's not about when that occurred, it's when it's discovered and the claim is made. If you relate this to your property insurance for your home or your business, that's a claims occurring. So when you have a fire, it's occurred. There's no getting around it. It's evident from the outset. This is claims made. So when you make the claim and it's discovered, that's the claims made basis of a policy. And when that happens, your claims notification clause, which is 24/7, 365, so it's any time of any day, global notification to the service provider. So effectively, we have our service providers have what we call sunrise notification. So whenever you notify, it will go to an English speaker somewhere where the sun is up. So if it's the middle of the night here, it'll go to Singapore or Hong Kong. If it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll be in the UK. I guess really the point there is always someone there to respond to your notification. And again, I'm perhaps reiterating something I've already said, but it is immediate access to these service providers allocated by the nature of the incident. For us, it's through a business called Crisis, which is part of Kennedy's law firm. They're an international law firm, huge business. Crisis is who we've engaged as our main contractor, and they have contracts with all the individual service providers for notification, rectification, extortion, breach forensics and so on. But the point is, it's deployed quickly, manages the issue and mitigates the ultimate quantum of the loss. So that is reduces the impact on your business and the value of the loss as well to us as insurers. Effectively deploy resource, discover the issue, notify where required and repair back to where you were before. And it gives you advice and guidance when you really need it, because with the best will in the world, none of us really know what to do when our business is affected in this way, and it holds your hand through the process. A premium is cost. We charge you a premium, and that premium gains you access to these providers, which costs the outcome of the breach or event. As I've said there, if you suffered a breach, what do you do? In this case, you advise your insurers. If you've no cover, you pick up the phone, and there's no way around it. You have to do something. You pick up the phone to people you find on the internet to negotiate a daily rate for their services. And as I said earlier, this quick deployment of resource can, and evidence does suggest that it can mitigate your regulatory position. The Carphone warehouse claim, and I think I did mention this earlier, but I'll just go over it again. They had a very, very severe breach that created not only a huge PR issue for them, but also a regulatory issue. And in the outcome as described by the ICO, they were, and I quote here, grossly negligent and undertook severe failure to protect the data they held. So they're on the back foot immediately, but ultimately they had an insurance policy. It responded quickly, and as a consequence of that, the regulator then turned and said, look, you've responded quickly and effectively to this issue. And they, this was under the Data Protection Act, their maximum fine of 500 grand was reduced to 400 grand. So they got 20% discount basically for a quick response. And certainly when, for us, there is always an excess on insurance, but certainly for us and some other insurance companies, for the first party costs, so the breach and the business interruption, there's no monetary excess. And on the third party side of things, such as defense costs from a lawyer, there's a 2,500, and 2,500 is about as little as you can expect as a deductible these days for cyber. But this is not a traditional indemnity policy. This is not your property is insured for £500,000. There's £500,000. Go away and rebuild it. It is a policy that will, for you pay us a premium, as I said earlier, and we will then provide you with the response and resource that you need, that is determined by the nature and value of that event under the insurance policy. Hopefully that makes sense. Chris? And you need the right product, and you need something that's up to date. You need something with clear language and intent. Certainly many of the older policies in the market are a developed version of PI or civil liability language, so it's got itself a little bit confused, I think, over the years, and it's graduated up from a very technical PI language. The more modern and up-to-date policies, and certainly ours is part of this, has very clear language. It is a ground-up developed specialist product, and behind that you've got the insurance security and the brand provided by Arch or whoever the insurance company is, and you need the right broker to do that. And certainly with Towergate, there's a level of expertise that is available in not many other brokers have got that level, certainly, of resource and expertise. And then it's choosing the indemnity limit. You can buy a policy that will indemnify you up to 100 grand, or you can buy one that will indemnify up to 5, 10, 15, 20 million. It's really about identifying what is the right value for you. Just to give you some perspective on that, in our book that we've bought in from Fusion Arista and is being developed by Arch, which is resolutely SME, the average limit we deploy is about 480,000. Okay, so it's pretty robust, but I would suggest that if we looked at that in 2 years from now, it's probably going to be close to double that. And rates are certainly, they're not cheap, Richard, but they're certainly aligned to the risk. So we think we've got that right. So I guess the customer is always the judge of that point.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing to interject there is that
I'm trying not to say that rates are coming down, but certainly there's a lot of choice out there. So
there is a lot of choice, but I think premiums can start as low as sort of £200, and that there are sort of some more basic levels of cover less than that. But you need to be buying the right cover for you, and that's the need for a broker, because they can help you understand what the bespoke requirements are for your business.
I'd say that's absolutely right, and certainly what we've done, and certainly most insurers have a core product which covers everything that we've discussed: breach, extortion, BI, regulatory defense costs, third-party actions. Okay, we, like many others, have a variable to that where we can add for additional premium for the financial loss, and the reason we do that is because it does create an additional premium which starts at £400 or £500, but really that is because that's where the frequency is. The most frequent loss at the moment is the social engineering. It doesn't have the high value of loss attached to it that you get through a major breach or forensic investigation. It's probably 15 to 20 grand at the moment in SME, and that's anecdotal from me and my colleagues in the market, but so you can probably take it as a fairly resolute number, and that's where these diverted transactions sit at the moment. 15, 20 grand is enough to make it worth the criminal's while, but it's a kind of it's a recognizable amount within most businesses. If someone was asking you to move £250,000, you'd really delve into it, because that's not a daily occurrence. But if it was 10, 15, 20 grand, that's probably more recognizable as a regular transaction value, and it's frequency for us. So this is where most claims come from. So we offer that cover. We do some fairly low-level underwriting around password updates, double checks on requests for payment by email only, and such like. But it's not particularly onerous, but it's a risk manage point. I think, Richard, you'd probably agree on that. If you manage a risk well, you're less exposed. But certainly, as an insurer, it's where the frequency is.
There's a question coming, Martin and Richard.
Yes.
I'll open it up to both of you. Thanks, Michael, for popping this in. Michael said he's already got a package policy that has cyber added onto it. is that going to be the same level of cover as the sort of policies that we've been talking about today?
Without seeing it, I'd struggle to comment. And really, that's something I'm not trying to divert this because I'm not allowed to give advice under the FCA regs, but it's a question for your broker. And
so I could probably answer that.
Richard can answer that as a broker.
No. So I think with any package policy, you are opening yourself up to a bit of a risk if you don't fully understand it, and I think that's true of any policy, and that hopefully is the broker's skill and where we can add some value, because we've got a view of the whole of the market. So once we we can discuss your needs, we can then align you to the right policy. So the policy you have may be at a lower level and may not have some of the rinky dinks that may have already been discussed today. So I'd be a little bit nervous and relying on an automatic cover within an existing policy without having had that conversation with your broker.
So
in my experience,
talk to your broker or talk to us, Michael.
In my experience, Richard, and such as it is, they tend to be mainly focused on extortion and BI rather than the breach and regulatory defence element of it. So usually it's a watered down version, but these things develop. This market moves so quickly. It would really need some kind of proper oversight from your broker, I think.
Thank you.
I think we've got one more slide, have we, guys?
Yeah.
So this is really just to give you guys an idea of what we look at as underwriters, okay? So rating is done on really what we call a portfolio basis. So we don't ask for a colossal amount of information up front, because we don't write banks, building societies, insurance brokers, sorry. We don't write managed care. We don't write health authorities and local government. We write commercial business, including professional services, such as yourselves. So we look at fairly low level information on a portfolio underwriting basis. So turnover is important, obviously the limit required. Do you require a quote for the financial loss extension and to respond to those 3 or 4 additional questions that we have? And a full description of business activities. What does that mean to an accountant? Really what your PI means. Are you doing tax work? Are you doing bookkeeping, some M&A? Or are you working mainly with PLCs or private companies? So nothing more perhaps than your PI insurer would ask by any means. And that would take us up for businesses. We'll be able to quote and bind on businesses up to 20 million turnover generally with that kind of front end information. Once it gets to over 20 million, we tend to look a bit more deeply into the detail behind it, because it gives us a greatly elevated business interruption exposure. In particular, if I said earlier, remember it's on income, not profit. If you think about your commercial insurance, your business interruption there is on loss of profit. This is about loss of revenue. So we will look more into encryption protections on mobile devices. That's where there is a real vulnerability for businesses. And that is, just to give you some reassurance, just about every current generation mobile device has automatic encryption. Just don't turn it off, really, as I was saying. The number of data records you hold. A data record is information held on any personal individual. It does not matter how many times you process that information. You could have my name and address and write to me every day for a year. I'm still one record, okay? Excuse me. Something about your IT protections and disaster recovery planning. Does it look at a cyber event, not just a fire or a flood or a act of God, if you like, under your general insurance perils? Does it deal with a system failure or system takedown? Do you go off-site, access your backups and so on? And do you do regular backups? And is it stored with a third-party provider, etc.? What are your recovery times? Could you operate without complete reliance on your IT? Most businesses can't. They probably struggle through for a few days. Again, if you go back to the NHS WannaCry malware ransomware a couple of years ago, if you remember, we had a lot of doctors' surgeries, and mine was, I actually went to the doctors when that happened, and they were writing prescriptions in pencil rather than printing them off. I don't know if you remember that happening. And we may look to get a proposal form, which will be, I'm sure you know this, a standard form which captures data by a series of questions. So, you know, we try at the front end, certainly for up to 20 mil turnover, we make it very straightforward. It becomes a little more technical, but not too intrusive for bigger businesses. Chris, have we got one more slide? Questions, there you go.
Yeah, it's just on to questions. I think I'm just in a brief summary for that. That's given a real good insight, I think, Martin, into hopefully you can look at this as a perspective from in your own practice and as a business, the risks that are out there when it comes to cyber, what some of the threats are, the sort of cover you can get in place, and the help and the resources there should, you know, the unfortunate happen. So I think that's given a real good snapshot and overview. We do have a few questions that are coming both for Martin and Richard, and as you know, we always try and keep our webinars to that sort of 45-minute mark. So we'll go through a couple of the more relevant ones, I think, here, and those that we don't answer now, we'll make sure we follow up in email afterwards. We've had one come through from David. It's what a few accountants have mentioned to me over the last few weeks as well, is how does having cyber essentials affect cover? Who wants to take that one? Martin?
Do you want me to answer that one, Richard? Yeah. It doesn't really, if I'm perfectly honest. Cyber essentials shows a commitment to a certain standard, okay? But will it mitigate or will it reduce premium, and is it critical to providing cover? Not really, but if the broker points it out to us, certainly it gives us some comfort as underwriters that there is an awareness and a level of commitment, I suppose, to, I mean, the investment, I think, is a few £100 to get it, and a certain question set. But yeah, it's certainly, you know, it's evidence to underwriters that there is awareness and commitment there, but we don't really use it as a rating factor, I'm afraid. Our rates are cheap enough anyway, Chris.
We've had a few people, the usual sort of questions we get. Richard, more for yourself really is, what are the costs involved in cyber cover?
Well, I think I touched on it briefly earlier. It does vary. If you have a very low entry level cover without, you know, with a very, very minimum, let's call it a basics, you could be talking sort of £100 touch. But when you start getting into cyber, it's £200 upwards, and you know, we've seen policies 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. So it does depend on each risk and each, you know, we've touched on where it needs to be properly underwritten, and where you get into the proposal form level, the premium is obviously going to increase. And in a really basic level, you can get a quotation with about 8 questions, and then it's sort of book rated and relatively cheap.
Yeah, I think what's really key, Richard, is, you know, speak to a broker who knows these policies. Speak to somebody that can give you the best advice to make sure that you get the correct cover in place for your practice. We do have, as part of the awareness campaign that we're going to be launching, we have some very good little online tools, or gamification pieces, Richard likes to call it. That will give you a good idea. I think that is sort of 8 to 10 questions. Yeah. That'll give you a good idea of the risk within your practice. And Richard, I'm sure, you know, the advisors you have around the country, local through all different regions, will be more than happy to chat to you guys and let you know and advise and you know, walk you through what you may potentially need there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are running very, very short on time, but one of the things, usual questions, yes, recordings will be sent out to everyone. Yes, we'll send copies of slides. We will send, part of our awareness campaign, we'll have the online links, so you can go through that and sort of gauge the risk that you have in each of your individual practices out there. We've got a few more questions, but we are tight on time, so we'll follow those up afterwards. If anybody would like to have a chat about anything they've had in the webinar, is interested in looking at getting quotes or taking anything forward, the email address is up on the screen, info@bfp.uk.com, or the office phone number there, and we'll be able to liaise and put you in touch with Richard and his team around the country. So Martin, thank you very much for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it. Richard, thank you very much as well, and thank you very much for everyone for listening.
Thank you.